There is a war being fought right now, and most people don't even know they're a soldier in it. They wake up. They go to work. They pay their bills. They call this normal life. Sun Tzu would call it something else, a battle already lost before it began, fought on ground chosen by someone else. Here is the painful truth nobody says out loud: staying broke is not an accident. It is a design. Somewhere between school, the workplace, and the shopping mall, a series of traps were built, quietly, invisibly, to keep the average person circling the same battlefield for 40 years, never advancing, never winning, just surviving long enough to retire tired. Sun Tzu understood something the modern world has forgotten. He wrote that the greatest victories are won before the battle even starts, through positioning, through patience, through knowing the terrain better than your opponent. Most people never study the terrain of money. They just show up to the fight unarmed, and wonder why they keep losing ground every single year. This isn't about working harder. Working harder inside a trap only tires you faster, it doesn't get you out. This is about seeing the traps clearly, maybe for the first time in your life. Because once you see them, you can't unsee them. And once you can't unsee them, you stop losing the same battle on repeat. There are 7 of these traps. Some are financial. Some are psychological. All of them are designed, sometimes by systems, sometimes by your own mind, to make sure you never accumulate real leverage. The wealthy have quietly known how to sidestep these traps for generations. The rest of the world keeps walking straight into them, generation after generation, calling it just how life is. By the end of this, you will understand why the ground you're standing on was never neutral, and what Sun Tzu would tell you to do about it. The first trap doesn't look like a trap at all. It looks like a paycheck. Every morning, millions of people wake up and walk straight onto a battlefield they didn't choose, one built entirely on someone else's terms. They call it a job. Sun Tzu would call it fighting on ground selected by the enemy, and he warned that whoever chooses the ground usually wins the war before a single move is made. Here's the trap: trading hours for dollars feels safe because it's predictable. A paycheck arrives. Bills get paid. But predictability is not the same as progress. The effort creates value, and that value is captured almost entirely by whoever owns the terrain, the business, the system, the structure. The worker rarely accumulates leverage. He accumulates fatigue instead. But there's a deeper problem most people never stop to notice. Consider 2 people starting the same year, same income. One trades 40 years of hours for a salary that rises slowly, if at all. The other builds something he owns outright, a business, an asset, a piece of ground with his name on the deed. 10 years pass. The employee has spent a decade of irreplaceable time for stability that can vanish in one bad quarter. The owner has built something that keeps compounding even when he isn't in the room. Ancient armies knew this difference well. The soldier who fights for another kingdom's glory comes home with scars, the general who commands his own campaign comes home with spoils. This is what makes the trap so effective: it wears the disguise of responsibility. Get a stable job sounds wise. But stability without ownership is just a slower way of losing, and almost no one questions it until the years are already gone. Ask yourself honestly, is your daily effort building something that grows without you, or quietly renting out your best years for a wage that resets to zero the moment you stop showing up? Sun Tzu's next lesson goes even deeper than ownership, because even those who escape the rented life often walk straight into a battlefield of pure appearance, spending their new gains to look powerful instead of becoming powerful. Sun Tzu wrote that all warfare is based on deception: appear weak when you are strong, and strong when you are weak. Somewhere along the way, an entire generation learned to apply this principle backward against themselves, appearing wealthy while quietly bleeding out financially. Walk into most cities and you'll see it everywhere: the least luxury car with a payment due on the first of every month, the financed watch bought to signal a success that hasn't actually arrived yet, the vacation photos funded by a credit line rather than a bank balance. None of it is wealth. It's a costume, and costumes are expensive to maintain. This is the second trap, and it's one of the cruelest, because it feels like winning while it quietly drains the war chest. Here's the deeper problem: appearance spending doesn't just cost money, it costs position. Every dollar spent projecting status is a dollar that will never compound, never buy equity, never generate leverage. The trap convinces you that looking successful and building success are the same battle. They are not even fought on the same terrain. Consider how the truly wealthy often behave. Rockefeller was famously unshowy, tracking every cent long after he'd made his fortune. Buffett still lives in a modest house he bought decades ago. They understood something the crowd misses: real power doesn't need to announce itself, because it isn't trying to convince anyone of anything. It's already secure. Meanwhile, the middle-class trap runs in the opposite direction: spend now to look secure, worry about the bill later. Ask yourself, how much of your monthly income currently goes toward looking successful to people who, if you disappeared tomorrow, would forget your name within a year? But appearances rarely stay self-funded for long. Eventually the costume needs financing, and that's exactly when the third trap opens its jaws, the one disguised as convenience, waiting patiently in every wallet. Sun Tzu warned that the supreme art is to subdue the enemy without fighting, to win before the opponent even realizes a battle has begun. Consumer debt is built on exactly this principle, except now the audience isn't the enemy. It's the ordinary buyer, and the war is being won against them without them ever noticing the fight started. In the early 20th century, a quiet innovation reshaped how people spent money forever: the installment plan. Suddenly, furniture, cars, and appliances didn't need to be earned first, they could be enjoyed now and paid for later, in small, forgettable pieces. It felt like freedom. In reality, it was terrain engineered so the buyer would keep marching forward into future obligations without ever noticing the ground shifting beneath him. This is the trap: debt for consumption disguises itself as convenience while functioning as a slow siege. A single purchase feels harmless. But stack enough of these small surrenders together: the financed phone, the revolving credit card balance, the buy now, pay later checkout button, and a person ends up spending years of future income before that income has even been earned. The war is lost in advance, one small ambush at a time. Here's what makes it worse: the mind rationalizes it instantly. I deserve this. It's only a small payment. Everyone does it. This rationalization is not weakness, it's a predictable psychological reflex, and the systems selling debt understand that reflex better than the people using it. They aren't guessing. They've studied the terrain of human desire for decades. Ask yourself, how much of your future income is already claimed by decisions your past self made in a moment of comfort? There's a reason so many people stay locked in this cycle instead of breaking free through calculated risk, and it isn't debt. It's fear. Which leads to a trap far quieter than any credit card, one that convinces you inaction is the same thing as safety. Sun Tzu drew a sharp line between the cautious general and the paralyzed one. Caution, used correctly, is a weapon. It protects resources and waits for the right moment to strike. But caution twisted into permanent avoidance becomes something else entirely: a slow siege where nothing is lost violently, but everything is lost gradually, through inaction. This is the fourth trap, and it's the one that disguises itself best, because it never feels like losing. It feels responsible. It feels smart. I'm just being careful. I'll invest once things are more certain. I don't want to take unnecessary risks. Each sentence sounds wise in isolation. Strung together over a decade, they become a wall nothing gets through: no growth, no leverage, no ground gained. Picture the person who's had the same modest savings account for 15 years, waiting for the right time to invest. The market dips, and they feel validated for waiting. The market rises, and they feel it's now too late to start. Certainty never arrives, because certainty was never actually the goal. Comfort was. And comfort, unlike capital, doesn't compound. It just sits there, quietly losing value to inflation while feeling perfectly safe. Sun Tzu never taught his generals to wait for a battlefield with zero risk, such a battlefield doesn't exist. He taught them to calculate risk precisely, then act decisively once the odds favored them. The paralyzed general and the broke saver share the same flaw, mistaking the absence of action for the presence of safety. Ask yourself, how many opportunities have you let pass in the name of waiting until I'm sure, and what did that certainty actually cost you in the years that followed? But comfort has a loud, persuasive cousin, one dressed up as diligence, as growth, as self-improvement. It convinces its victims they're moving forward, when in reality they're just circling the same spot, collecting information they never intend to use. Sun Tzu placed enormous weight on intelligence, knowing the terrain, knowing the enemy, knowing the timing. But he never once suggested that gathering information was the same thing as winning. Intelligence without action, he understood, is just noise dressed up as strategy. And noise is exactly what the fifth trap is built from. Picture the person who has watched hundreds of hours of business content, read a dozen books on investing, joined 3 different courses on building income, and has executed none of it. Not because the information was bad, but because consuming it felt productive enough to quiet the discomfort of actually stepping onto the battlefield. This is the trap. Research becomes a hiding place disguised as preparation. It shows up everywhere in modern business. The aspiring entrepreneur who spends 2 years validating the idea, instead of launching a rough version and learning from real customers. The investor who reads endlessly about markets but has never actually placed a single trade. Sun Tzu would recognize this instantly. An army that only scouts and never advances eventually starves in its own camp, no matter how much it knows about the enemy's position. Here's the uncomfortable truth beneath it: endless research often isn't about becoming more prepared. It's about postponing the risk of being wrong. As long as you're still learning, you can't fail, but you also can't win. The trap feels like growth because information genuinely does feel good to acquire. It satisfies curiosity instantly, while real execution only pays off later, and with uncertainty attached. Ask yourself, is there a decision you've been still researching for months or years that, if you're honest, you already know enough to act on? There's a reason so many bright, informed people never break out of this loop alone, because knowledge hoarded in isolation rarely turns into leverage. Which leads to a trap that looks like independence, but is actually the most exposed position on the entire battlefield. Sun Tzu never won a war by himself, and he never taught his generals to try. Alliances, shared intelligence, coordinated positioning, these were treated as weapons, not weaknesses. Yet somewhere in modern culture, a myth took root that going it alone is the noblest path to success. This is the sixth trap, and it's one of the most self-inflicted, because it wears the mask of independence while functioning as isolation. Ancient campaigns were rarely won by lone armies overpowering everyone through sheer force. They were won through alliances, kingdoms combining resources, sharing intelligence, covering each other's weaknesses. A single army, however skilled, could be surrounded and cut off from supply lines. An allied force had reinforcements, information, and leverage a solitary unit could never generate alone. The same principle holds in business today. The entrepreneur who refuses mentorship because "I'll figure it out myself" often spends years relearning lessons that a single conversation could have shortened. The professional who avoids networking, partnerships, or masterminds isn't being more self-reliant, they're simply fighting without allies, without scouts, without shared supply lines. Meanwhile, quiet partnerships and networks compound advantage the same way capital does. Access to the right relationship can open more doors in a year than a decade of solitary effort. The trap convinces its victims that needing others is weakness. In reality, refusing others is what leaves a person exposed: no second opinion to catch a blind spot, no shared resource to soften a setback, no ally to vouch for them when opportunity requires trust built by someone else. Ask yourself, where in your financial life are you insisting on fighting alone, when a single alliance or mentor could change your position entirely? There's one trap left, and it's the quietest of all, because it doesn't show up as a bad decision. It shows up as a good decision, made about 10 years too early to pay off, abandoned right before the reward was due. Sun Tzu believed that whoever controls time controls the war. Not whoever moves fastest, whoever moves at the right moment, and is willing to wait for it. This is the seventh trap, and it is perhaps the most self-inflicted of all, because it doesn't require an outside system to spring it. The person sets it themselves, then walks straight into it. The trap works like this: a good decision gets made, an investment, a business, a skill worth mastering. For a while, discipline holds. But the reward doesn't arrive on the timeline the mind quietly expected, and the temptation to abandon ship grows louder with every month of silence. Most people don't fail because their strategy was wrong. They fail because they exited right before the compounding curve started to bend upward. Buffett and Munger built empires almost entirely on this single edge, not superior information, but superior patience. Munger once observed that the big money isn't in the buying or selling, but in the waiting. Everyone has access to that same principle. Almost no one has the temperament to use it, because waiting doesn't feel like progress. It feels like nothing is happening, right up until, suddenly, everything has. This is where all seven traps quietly connect. The rented life trades away the time patience requires. The war of appearances spends the capital patience needs to compound. The debt ambush mortgages the future patience depends on. The comfort siege and the noise trap disguise avoidance as diligence. The lone soldier trap removes the allies who could have helped someone hold the line. And impatience is what finally cashes it all in, right before the payoff. Ask yourself, is there something you already started, already know is right, and are simply losing the nerve to continue? Sun Tzu's final teaching brings every one of these traps together into a single battlefield truth, and it changes how you see every decision from this point forward. 7 traps. Different shapes, different disguises: the rented job, the borrowed status, the financed lifestyle, the false safety of comfort, the noise mistaken for progress, the isolation mistaken for independence, the impatience that cashes out too soon. But look closely and they're not 7 separate wars. They're one single pattern, fighting on ground chosen by someone else, on a timeline someone else set, using rules someone else designed. Sun Tzu never promised an easy war. He promised that the side who understands the terrain, controls their timing, and positions before the fighting even starts will win far more often than the side swinging blindly and hoping for the best. That's the real shift available to you now, not a new tactic, but a new vantage point. You're no longer standing in the middle of the battlefield reacting to whatever comes next. You're standing above it, watching the patterns, seeing exactly where the traps are laid before you ever get close to them. This is the difference between the person who spends 40 years fighting the same losing battle without knowing why, and the person who quietly, patiently, builds a position nothing can easily take from them. Not through luck. Not through some rare gift. Through seeing clearly what almost everyone else walks past without noticing. You've now seen all 7. The question Sun Tzu would leave you with isn't which trap hurt you the most in the past, it's which one you're standing in right now, today, without realizing it. Which one was it for you? Say it in the comments. Naming it is the first move in winning it.